Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training, we're going to be talking about connecting nutrition and movement. So we're going to go ahead and bring together a lot of the different concepts that we have spoken about inside of the last few trainings, and we are going to go ahead and put them together by filling in the gaps in where you might have your understanding of nutrition and movement. So just as a reminder, we are going through the science of transformation inside of this module, and we are going through the 4 pillars of health, right? And so what we're going to be doing inside of this training is we're going to go ahead and connect these 2 pillars together, nutrition and movement, and talk about some of the nuances and the subtleties and some of the details that happen at the intersection between nutrition and movement. Now, as always, you do want to make sure that you always understand that as you are going through this module specifically, we are laying the foundations for you to go through your own transformation, as well as the transformation so that way you can coach your own students, right? So ultimately, you have to keep in mind that I know, especially going through module number 3, there are a lot of activities, there's a lot of challenges and observations and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm telling you, just keep on pushing through because it's absolutely going to be worth it. And you're doing a phenomenal job as you go through this, okay? Now, for this specific introduction, I do want to go ahead and quickly touch on this whole process and this whole question, which is, hey, this is all great and dandy and all, Coach Yasin, but how exactly am I going to actually get clients, right? Cool. I'm learning how I'm going to put this together. You talked to me about how in module 5, we're actually going to talk about how to structure this for our students, but how am I actually going to get clients? How am I actually going to get students, right? How am I going to get those clients consistently? All right, great. You're going to give us all the tools and all the swipe files and all the templates for our transformation program, but are we actually going to get to the point where you show us how to get clients and students consistently? And the answer to that question is yes, 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 because you have to keep in mind where we are so far is you are in phase number 1 of the program. You're going through the remote wellness certification, the remote wellness training, which is going to give you the power to then put in production. And so when we get into phase number 2, that's when we go ahead and talk about all of that. Okay. So I promise you, once we do get to phase number 2 and the actual money making part, 1000% all of your questions will be answered in regards to that. In fact, it's really going to start to click for you once we even get to the end of phase number 1 over here, right? And so imagine how much detail we are going in with phase number 1, right? Look at how much your understanding of health has grown, how much your understanding of transformation has grown. Imagine when we get to phase number 2 and we really start to put the magnifying glass on income and business training, you are going to be absolutely blown away. So if you're not seeing the theme here at RWA Remote Wellness Academy, we really make sure that we over deliver and you have a world-class experience as a student. So just be ready to have your mind blown once we actually get to phase number 2, which is about the money, the business, and the income training. Okay, so for right now, just sit back, plant the seeds. All of this that you're going through right now is planting the seeds for reference. Remember, you don't have to memorize this. Go through phase number 1, get your certification, relax, and I promise you, this is the process. It is going to come together for you, and so you are doing a phenomenal job with this so far. So with that being said, let's go ahead and next talk about connecting nutrition and movement and really talk about what we call the billion-dollar intersection, okay? With a billion-dollar intersection, when we talk about this, is what we're really talking about is having an understanding of the market when it comes to nutrition and movement, right? We want you to be educated properly from all angles. And so it's very important for us here at Remote Wellness Academy for our students to be educated with how things are currently in the market, okay? Because ultimately, I've said this many times before, remote wellness is awesome. Learning about nutrition is awesome. Learning about movement is awesome. But ultimately, we are inside of this academy in order to serve and provide value in exchange for an income, right? We can't feed our families with remote wellness. We can't feed our families and have the lifestyle that we want, and have the freedom that we want, and have the financial security that we want just by understanding nutrition and movement. We got to be able to package that in a way that serves people at the highest level in exchange for the value that we provide. We are making an income. And so a part of that is not just theoretically understanding these concepts, concepts, but also understanding where the market is right now, so that way we can provide value in the way that the market sees fit, right? And so the truth is that as you go into the industry, it's very important for you to be educated about some of the other careers and other professionals who are in similar industries. And so whenever you talk to somebody who is, let's say, in health coaching, or somebody is in personal training, or somebody is in traditional wellness, right? What they are actually talking about is they're talking about a very small piece of what it is that you have learned so far in this module. Why? Because there are literally billion-dollar industries that are based solely on the middle point and the middle ground between just these trainings, right? These 6 trainings that we've talked about: what is food, what to eat, how much to burn, which was metabolism, how much to eat, which was macronutrients, all that kind of stuff, when and where, and movement. The intersection of these 6 trainings right here is where a lot of people, when they delve into the topics of health coaching and personal training and traditional wellness, this is the piece that they are talking about, okay? And so that's why I want you to be educated in how the marketplace speaks and what the marketplace is doing. And again, remember, this is just a small piece of what it is that you have already gone ahead and uncovered. So imagine if people are building 6 and 7 figure businesses off of just a small piece of what it is that you have already learned. Imagine how much more valuable and how much more value you will be able to provide to your students specifically, right? And so when we talk about these 6 trainings, again, which is a small piece of what it is that you've gone through, really start to make up the backbone of the gym and fitness industry, right? We talk about the weight loss industry, $192 billion industry. We talk about the fitness industry, $87 billion industry, over $87 billion industry, right? And so for the longest time, the truth is that we ourselves, inside of our own remote wellness practice, we actually only spoke about the mainstream topics of nutrition and movement, right? Honestly, that's what we did for the longest time inside of our remote wellness practice, okay? And so these 6 trainings that you went through was pretty much at a simplified level everything that we taught to our students at that time, okay? And then the cool thing about it is at that time, years ago, we were very, 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 very good at this. And we were very good at turning that into a business and providing value to others. In fact, just on those topics alone, again, which is just a small piece of what it is that you've learned so far, we actually added 257 clients in our first 4 months in business at NutriFit Wellness, which was our remote wellness practice, okay? And then later on, what we did is we started helping other students build their own 6-figure online coaching businesses, teaching only the concepts from the 6 trainings that we talked about above. And in fact, those 6 trainings were even more simplified than what it is that you are going through right now. And so that business, in which we used to help people actually help others with weight loss and muscle gain and that kind of stuff, was called Online Fit Pro. And then those students from that program were doing $10,000 to $30,000 a month from just a piece of what it is that you have learned so far. And so I just want you to imagine that, right? I want to kind of connect nutrition and movement together inside of this training, so that way you can really start to understand, okay, wait a second, there is a massive opportunity only just at the intersection of these 2 concepts related to nutrition and movement. And the reason that was the case is because years ago, we used to think that really the only things that mattered were weight loss and building muscle, right? We used to think that was really what students and clients needed. Remember, this was years ago, right? And so really that's why we only focused at a very simplified level, not even at the level that you have learned thus far on these 6 trainings, right? We never used to focus on how to eat or who to be when you eat or who you are being when you move. We never focused on that kind of stuff, right? Obviously, since then, we've gone through a radical transformation ourselves in the way that we educate our students and educate our clients, right? Because what we saw was that when we only focus on the mechanics of health, instead of focusing on the lifestyle and habit and identity change, then what ended up happening was that we did not get the same amazing transformations as we did once we started focusing on the becoming process and transformations and identity and how to eat and all of those kinds of things, right? In fact, what we started noticing was that when we only focused on things like weight loss and muscle gain, we were actually doing more harm than good. good, because when we only focused on those things, it was actually making people more miserable rather than helping them make a lifestyle change. Yes, they might have been able to push themselves for a short period of time, but ultimately they were not able to stick to what it is that they needed to do in order to have that life transformation, right? And so that's when we introduced these concepts related to how to eat and who to be when you eat and who to be when you are moving and sleep and recharge and some of the other things that you're going to learn inside of this module. And that's where we started to see the transformation approach really become something that was life transforming for students and clients, okay? And so this is really where we saw that student success went sky high. And here's the beautiful thing from a business perspective is that not only are you providing more value, but then on top of that, because you are providing more value, you are able to charge more for your programs. And that's exactly what we noticed as well when we made that shift from only focusing on weight loss and only focusing on muscle gain and only focusing on the having, and we started focusing more on the being, okay? And so ultimately, it's a win-win for both the student and the client and the business. So that way, not only are you able to charge more, but you're also providing more value to the end student. Now, here's the thing. After hearing what it is that we just talked about, okay, some students might ask the question and say, you know what? Hey, Coach Yasin, don't we as RWPs help people with weight loss, right? And I want to go ahead and clarify this very, very clearly, okay? Because that is not correct. We as RWPs, we as remote wellness practitioners, do not help people with weight loss. Now, after hearing that, you might be saying, huh? What in the world? Coach Yasin, what are you saying, right? Coach Yasin, you're always making these strange statements. What the heck are you talking about? Don't we help people with weight loss? Isn't that a part of what it is that we do? And here, I want you to hear me out for a second here, okay? Because here is the truth. We as RWPs do not help people with weight loss in the way that you are thinking, okay? Because weight loss might be the selling point. It might be what gets somebody into the door. It might be what somebody thinks that they want. They might think that they want the muscle gain. They might think that they want the fat loss. They might think that they want to be able to look better in their clothes, right? However, as we learned when we talked about the why behind the why, we talked about the why of health in a previous training, that's not actually necessarily what they are looking for, right? And so here is the truth. What we as RWPs are doing is we are helping people engage in wellness, right? Because do you remember what the definition of remote wellness is? We talked about this in module number 1. We said that remote wellness is helping people have transformation and live well in each of the 4 areas of life by learning the foundations, becoming conscious, and managing stress. And so it's very important to understand that what we are doing is helping people have transformation in their life and have more wellness. This is probably like ingrained into your head by now. You probably hear me at night in your sleep while you're dreaming telling you these words over and over and over again, right? We've said this over and over and over again. However, what's important to understand, and the cool part about this, is that weight loss is the byproduct of that life transformation, right? The weight that someone is carrying is more of a result of who they are and the life that they are living. And so yes, indirectly, we are helping people with weight loss, and sometimes if it's their goal, that's what we're doing and we're helping them with that, okay? However, in and of itself, it is not the main focus. It is the byproduct of the transformation process. And that's why it's very important for you to understand inside of this training when we talk about connecting nutrition and movement, because yes, we are going to be talking about weight loss and we are talking about fat loss and muscle gain inside of this training. However, the reason why I'm emphasizing this from the very beginning is because you need to understand the context in which all of what it is that we're going to be talking about is going to be applied for your students, okay? So I hope that makes sense. If it does not, let us know, and we are more than happy to go ahead and help clarify as coaches, but I hope that is very clear for you. And so what we're gonna be doing inside of this training specifically is that now that we've cleared up what the connection of weight loss is for us as RWPs, is we're going to go ahead and switch gears and focus specifically on weight loss and muscle gain inside of this training. Why? Because even though it is something that we only focus on indirectly, the truth is that even though we as RWPs know that what a student actually needs is transformation and identity change and all that kind of stuff, we still must be able to deliver at a surface level the outcome so that way we can get the student through the front door. What does that mean? What does it mean to be able to get a student through the front door? And that's where I want to explain to you a very important coaching concept that relates to being able to deliver what somebody wants on the front end and then being able to deliver what they need on the back end. And so you can very much imagine that it's kind of like trying to give medicine to a dog, right? If any of you guys have a dog or if you guys have any pets or anything like that, you might be able to resonate with this, okay? Because whenever you want to try to get your dog or your puppy or whoever, your pet or whatever, to go ahead and take medicine, it's the last thing they ever want to do, right? And so instead, a very awesome trick that you can use is you go ahead and wrap that medicine inside of what it is that they want. And in the case of a dog, it might be a treat, it might be a piece of ham, whatever it might be, right? And so even though we know that the dog needs the medicine, we sometimes have to deliver it in a way that they are willing to accept it, aka putting it in something that they actually want, right? And so even though weight loss or muscle gain is what gets them into the front door, it's not the thing that is going to transform their life. We know that as RWPs, right? However, what we do is we lead with what the student wants, which might be weight loss, it might be muscle gain, it might be, wanting to feel better, it might be having more energy, right? Don't get only stuck to weight loss or muscle gain. We're not saying that that is what you are going to be focusing on. You really can fill in the blank with whatever goal they tell you they have inside of their initial consultation, right? It does not necessarily have to be weight loss or muscle gain, okay? And then once that individual, once that prospect crosses over to becoming a student, then we're able to go ahead and help them and give them what it is that they need, which is the actual transformation, right? And so you're going to be learning inside of Module 5 and Module 6 when we walk you through what's called the strategy session script. Inside of that script and inside of that framework that you're going to learn in upcoming modules, you're going to understand exactly how to explain your transformation program to your prospective students, okay? So inside of that framework that you're going to learn, you're going to understand exactly how to take what it is that we are talking about here in terms of leading with what they want and then being able to deliver what they need. You're going to be learning that inside of the upcoming modules, okay? So again, don't worry about this right now. However, I am just planting the seeds so you do know what is coming. And so because of the fact that there is that element in which we are leading with what the student wants inside of the strategy session script, it's very important for us inside of this training specifically to be able to fill in the gaps for you so that way you can better understand exactly what that intersection between nutrition and movement is. Because ultimately the truth is this: a lot of the students that do come to you in regards to remote wellness and wanting help in remote wellness, they're not coming to you in order to say, hey, I want to shift my beliefs and I want to shift my identity and I want to have a transformation and all this kind of stuff. Nobody goes and purchases a product or anything like that in order to say, hey, I want to change my identity, okay? The market capacity for those people who say, hey, I want to buy something to change my identity is basically zero, okay? Or it's a very, very small. Maybe not zero, but it's very, very small, right? Think about even when you purchased this program, even when you joined this program, it wasn't based off of the notion that, hey, I want to go ahead and change my identity, right? It wasn't based off of that. It was saying, hey, I want to go ahead and make 6 and 7 figures online remotely. That is why I'm going to be joining this program. And so in the same way, when people come to you and ask for help and ask for change inside of their life, it's going to be something that feels tangible for them. They're going to say, hey, I want to lose 20, 30 pounds. Hey, I want to gain XYZ muscle. Hey, I want to fit in this body. I want to have this kind of energy. I want to do XYZ. And so that is why inside of this training, it's so important for you to be able to understand the want aspect of it. And then obviously you on the back end, you are equipped with the need aspect of it as well. Okay, so again, don't worry too much about this. I am just planting the seeds. However, just to go ahead and make a note when we talk about feeding your dog or your pet and giving them what they want and what they need, just to clarify, in no way, shape, or form are we calling our students dogs. Okay, please do not understand that. Please do not be so small-minded to think that. Okay, that is like literally facepalm. The fact that I even have to make clarifying statements like that. But unfortunately, I've been an educator for many years, and I know that some students unfortunately do think and take things out of context. And so I just wanted to go ahead and clarify that really quickly. And so with that being said, what we're going to be going ahead and doing inside of this training, like we said, is really connecting the dots between nutrition and movement. And again, remember, this is so that even though we're not focusing only on the topics of nutrition and movement with our students, we can at least speak and be educated and properly understanding, knowing the ins and outs regarding weight loss and fat loss and muscle gain and all that kind of stuff regarding these specific trainings. Now, the last point I want to go ahead and emphasize as we jump into the couple points I want to address inside of this training is that there are literally entire certifications based on these trainings alone. I've mentioned this many times and I want to mention it one more time. I have literally taken entire certifications. I'm talking about 12 plus modules specifically and only on the topics of coaching people through calories, macronutrient distributions, how to do exercises and movement, how to do mobility, all of that kind of stuff, okay? It's literally a science, and how, for example, bodybuilders compete and do their shows, how athletes monitor their intake in order to have optimal performance. It's literally an entire science, okay? And so these topics, when we talk about them inside of these trainings right here and inside of the training that you are going through right now, I literally cannot tell you how much of an understatement it is to say that it's literally an entire science, okay? However, after hearing that, rather than being overwhelmed, what I want you to know is that, do you need any of that additional science as an RWP? Absolutely not, okay? But a surface level understanding is going to be good for you to have, so that way you can function within the industry at a sufficient level for the purposes of your remote wellness practice, okay? So just understand that in no way, shape, or form are we saying that you need to go out and do all of these other certifications. No, that is not what we are saying. What we are saying is that I do just want you to understand that there are a lot more science elements to this that can be explored if you ever chose to do so years in the future. But for the purposes of business, for the purposes of making an income, it is not at all needed or necessary. And so what are we going to actually cover inside of this training? Well, this training is going to be a little bit more brief than a lot of the other trainings that we've discussed because of the fact that we're only going to be going through 3 important points when it comes to understanding weight loss and muscle gain, aka the world of nutrition and movement. Okay, so point number 1 is expectations around fat loss and muscle gain. Point number 2 is going to be calories and movement. And then point number 3 is it really all about calories? Okay, so this is what the graphic is going to look like as we go ahead and progress throughout this training. So let's go ahead and hop right into point number 1, expectations around fat loss and muscle gain. Because here's the truth, and this is something that you really need to understand regarding this entire world of fat loss and muscle gain, is that fat loss and muscle gain is absolutely a process. And it is a process that is measured in weeks, months, and years. It is not, I repeat, it is not a process that is measured in days, okay? And so this is why it is so difficult for people to wrap their heads around, because although it is something that we do daily, right? We eat the food daily, we go to the gym or do our walking or our movement, XYZ on a daily basis, we watch what we're eating, we measure our weight, we track our weight, we do all of these things on a daily basis. However, and this is what trips up a lot of people in the head, is that we observe the change not on the daily basis, but we observe the change on the weekly, monthly, and yearly basis, okay? And so that's why it's so difficult for people to understand. And so what are we talking about when we talk about proper expectations around fat loss and muscle gain? When we talk about proper expectations around fat loss and muscle gain, we're talking about, in terms of fat loss, typically about 3 pounds of pure fat loss per month, okay? And so even though we spoke about a caloric deficit and how you burn more calories by moving more or all these kinds of things, the truth is that sustainable weight loss or sustainable fat loss journey, it's very important to set the expectation for you and your students that it's going to be about 3 pounds of pure fat loss per month, give or take. Sometimes if you want to stretch it, we can even push it to about 1 pound per week, okay? And so it's very important to understand those expectations. And so for somebody who has, let's say, 30 pounds to lose, it is going to take maybe about 10 months, okay? And so it's very important to understand these expectations. In the same way, When we talk about muscle gain, the truth is that it's very difficult for the body to synthesize muscle, right? It takes a lot of amino acids and building that foundation in order to be able to create and grow muscle. And so for that reason, a good rule of thumb when gaining muscle is about 1 pound per month of pure muscle gain. Now, a few caveats to that. If someone has just started lifting, then their gains are going to be significantly faster, maybe around 2 to 5 pounds per month of muscle gain, right? And then for somebody who is more advanced, then their true new muscle gain is most likely going to be even less than that. We're talking about anywhere between, let's say, 1 to 3 years of lifting, somewhere around there. The rate of muscle gain drops from about 1 pound per month to maybe even about half a pound per month of true muscle gain. And then obviously, if somebody is actually regaining the muscle that they previously lost, then obviously that muscle gain is going to be faster if they previously had that muscle mass existing. And so we're talking about new muscle gain compared to rebuilding muscle gain that they already had. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the confusion then between what people see on the weight scale and the actual weight of the fat or the muscle. Because some students, after hearing those expectations of about 3 pounds a month of fat loss and about 1 pound a month for muscle gain, they might say, hey, Coach Yasin, right now I'm focusing on losing fat. And guess what? I'm losing fat significantly more than what the expectation that you set. Hey, Coach Yasin, I'm focused right now on gaining muscle and I'm gaining like 10 pounds of muscle per month. So, there's your expectation, right? And this is where I want to clarify. Because yes, you need to understand that there's a difference between muscle gain that you see on the scale and pure muscle gain. There's a difference between the fat loss that you see on the scale and pure fat loss. Because what does that mean? It means that if you are actually working on gaining muscle, well, the truth is that because you're going to be in a caloric surplus, some of that weight that you're seeing on the scale with quote unquote parentheses there is actually going to include a little bit of fat. And so even though you might have gained 3 pounds of muscle in 1 month, you probably gained maybe like 1.5 pounds of muscle, right? And then the rest of it might have been like 2 pounds of fat, or water weight, or a lot of other factors, right? And so it's okay that you're not gaining exactly according to the plan, because you're never going to be able to get it 100% exact. And so you need to delineate and understand the difference between the weight on the scale and the pure fat that you're burning or the pure muscle that you are gaining, okay? This is a very important distinction to understand when we are connecting nutrition and movement, right? Because you have the nutrition aspect, which is the calories that you are eating, and then you have the movement aspect, which is the building of the actual muscle. In the same way, when we're talking about losing fat, even though you're like, hey, you know what, right now I stand on the scale and I'm like 10 pounds much more lighter than I was last month, that must mean that I lost 10 pounds of fat, right? Because when you're actually losing fat, there's actually a percentage of muscle that you're losing there. There's water weight that you're losing there. Because you're in a caloric deficit, there's a lot of other things that are going on inside of your body. And so for the person who may not understand this concept, they might say, hey, I lost 10 pounds of fat in 1 month, but in reality, they lost a few pounds of water. They lost a couple pounds of muscle, maybe not a couple pounds of muscle, but they definitely lost some muscle. And guess what? That's okay, because it's a part of the process. However, the mistake is to think that the weight on the scale is exactly the same as the fat or loss or the muscle gain, okay? So this is all a normal part of the process, and you want to make sure that you are setting your expectations properly so that way you're not stressing yourself out. A lot of times students, what will end up happening is that they'll be in a caloric deficit and they'll lose, let's say for example, 6 or 7 pounds of quote unquote fat. I say quote unquote because it wasn't really fat, right? It was a mixture of water and fat and muscle and all that kind of stuff. And then when they go back into maybe a caloric maintenance, they end up gaining some of that water weight back. And so that 5 or 10 pounds that they thought they lost was actually maybe only 2 or 3 pounds. And so you can imagine if you don't set the expectations properly, then you're like, oh man, I thought I lost 10 pounds of fat, but then when I started going back into caloric maintenance, I realized that I only lost, 1 or 2 or 3 pounds of fat. And so as a result, you feel let down because of the fact that you were hyping yourself up that you lost 10 pounds of fat in 1 month. And so this is the reason why we're connecting all of this together. So that way for yourself as well as for your students, you can properly set the expectations and understand what is a problem and what is not a problem. Because a lot of people beat themselves up and say, oh man, actually I'm only losing like 3 pounds per month, or I'm only losing like 4 pounds a month. And that's a problem. Something must be wrong. When in reality, if you just set the expectations, you understand that 3-4 pounds, that's phenomenal. That's amazing. Keep on going. Like that's phenomenal. And so this is why it's very important to set the expectations properly. And so ultimately, when we are talking about this point number 1, that is exactly what we are talking about, right? That is point number 1 about setting the expectations of fat loss and muscle gain. Okay, so that's point number 1. Let's go ahead and jump now into point number 2, which is understanding calories and movement and the connection between the two, right? Because remember, inside of this training, we're talking about nutrition, which we talked a lot about calories and metabolism and that kind of stuff. And then we're connecting that to movement. Okay, so what I want you to understand here for a second is I want you to go ahead and picture inside of your mind's eye some of the best, really tasty chocolate chip cookies that you have ever had in your entire life. Okay, your favorite kind. Okay, I live in Dallas, Texas. We have a company called Tiff's Treats here. I absolutely love their chocolate chip cookies. Phenomenal. That's the cookies that I'm imagining. Okay, I want you to imagine whatever your favorite chocolate chip cookie is. Okay, now the question I want you to ask yourself is, how many minutes does it take for you to be able to eat just two of these amazing warm chocolate chip cookies, right? I want you to think about how long it would take you in order to gobble down your 2 favorite of all time chocolate chip cookies. The answer to that question is probably something like less than a minute. Like if you really wanted to, you could probably gobble down like less than a minute, 2 of them very easily, right? And then if somebody gave you like 5 minutes and said, hey, just go all out and go ahead and eat as many of those cookies as you can in 5 minutes, you could probably eat like 10 plus of them if you really wanted to. They're your favorite kind after all, right? So my question to you then would be, how many calories do you think are in each of those chocolate chip cookies? Well, on average, a 16-gram chocolate chip cookie has about 80 calories in it. How many calories? 80. 80, okay? And so even though those 2 chocolate chip cookies took you less than a minute to eat, they actually added up to a total of 160 calories, okay? So on average, 16 gram of chocolate chip cookie, one of them has 80 calories. And so the 2 cookies that you ate that took you less than 1 minute to eat added up to 160 calories. And so here's my next question for you. My next question for you is, how many minutes do you think that you would have to work out? How many minutes would you have to move? How many minutes would you have to exercise in order to be able to burn those 160 calories, aka the 2 chocolate chip cookies that took you less than 1 minute to eat? Okay, so took you 1 minute to eat them. How many minutes do you now need to exercise and move in order to burn those 160 calories? Well, if you go ahead and look into this, you'll see that for somebody who is, let's say, 200 pounds, it would take them more than 30 minutes of walking in order for them to burn off 2 cookies, okay? So how many calories do you burn walking 2.5 miles per hour for 30 minutes, okay? For somebody who is 200 pounds, it would take them walking more than 30 minutes in order to burn off 160 calories. And so I want you to think about that for a second. 30 minutes of having to move, right? And I'm not talking about just like, hey, let me just move a little bit. No, I'm talking about legit walking at 2.5 miles an hour. That's not a light speed. That's like, hey, that's like you're really walking, right? 30 minutes of that compared to 1 minute of eating your favorite chocolate chip cookies, 2 of them, okay? And so this is the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot outwork a poor diet. You cannot outwork poor nutrition. And so ultimately, when we talk about muscle gain and we talk about fat loss, and primarily fat loss is primarily a game of nutrition. Even when we talk about muscle gain, it's primarily a game of nutrition. And so this is why we spent so much time inside of this module talking about nutrition, okay? Does movement help? Of course, we talked about movement, how movement is very important. It facilitates and it kind of speeds up this entire process in some way, shape, or form, right? It helps burn a few hundred calories here and there. But ultimately, and this is what you need to understand when we talk about connecting nutrition and movement, is that ultimately, this is a game of nutrition and it is a game of inputs. And so you need to make sure that you are monitoring your inputs, because it is not possible to outwork a poor diet. Literally, if you were on like a treadmill 24 hours a day, but you were still eating 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 calories over your maintenance, it would be basically impossible for you to be able to outwork a diet. This is very, very, very important to understand, is that you cannot outwork poor nutrition. And so this is why when we talk about counting calories from movement, right? We touched on this a little bit in a previous training, and we talked about, hey, do we care about counting calories from movement? It's like, hey, can't I adjust my caloric intake every single day based off of how many calories I walked or I exercised or did XYZ? We talked about in a previous training how it is literally one of the most difficult things to do in order to actually estimate how many calories you burn from movement. It's very, very, very difficult to do. They have a difficult time actually doing that inside of a laboratory. Imagine, even though your Fitbit or your Apple Watch or whatever claims that it can tell you how many calories you burned while you're doing XYZ activity, it is basically impossible to get an accurate measurement for that. And so it is for that reason that we do not change the calories that we are consuming in favor for some sort of expectation or some sort of estimation, okay? Because there are no devices that can do it accurately, okay? And so ultimately, this is what you need to understand. We do not want to add a bunch of uncertainty and estimation to our calculation, which so far, if you are doing it off of food labels and app tracking and all that kind of stuff, it is very much a close to exact science. It's very close. It's as close as we can get to an exact science, because there's a lot of infrastructure in today's society that actually calculates calories and all that kind of stuff, right? And so this is the reason why we do not track output calories from movement, so that way we can have consistency in the tracking of our calories. Because tracking input calories from food is dramatically more accurate because of food labels and apps and all that kind of stuff than tracking output calories from movement. And so as long as we're doing roughly about the same amount of movement weekly, then it will average out, and the weight trends are going to go ahead and average out on the weight scale every single morning. So this is very important to understand when we talk about this in this way. The other reason that is not actually mentioned on here, and the reason why, another reason we don't actually track movement calories, is because imagine if you didn't have consistency in the amount of food that you were eating every single day. We already talked about the importance of consistency and the rhythm of the body and all this kind of stuff, right? So imagine one day you're eating, let's say 2,500 calories, and then the next day you're like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and walk like 1,000 calories and just going to stay on the treadmill, or going to just go do a bunch of stuff like that. And then instead of eating 2,500 calories, I'm going to eat 3,500 calories. And so that by itself is not very good for the body. And so instead what we do is we keep our inputs consistent, and then we try to keep our movement consistent as well. And then over the time, over the weeks, it is going to go ahead and average out. So I hope that is clear, and I hope that message is very important to understand in the reason why we do not count calories from movement. Okay, so that is point number dos. When we talk about this entire process, point number one we talked about was the expectations of fat loss and muscle gain. And then point number two we just talked about is the intersection between calories and movement, how you can't outwork a poor nutrition and a poor diet, and why we don't actually calculate and track calories that are burned from movement. Now, point number three that we're going to go ahead and address right now is going to be about, is it all really about calories, right? And not only that, I'm going to go ahead and tag on another thing is, hey, is it really all about tracking, right? In general, this whole tracking thing, it makes me neurotic. It makes me difficult to do. I like to have, complex foods. I like to be able to have a lot of variety in my foods. And so as a result, I don't really like this whole tracking thing. And this is what I want to go ahead and ease your concerns with for a second. Yes, I agree with you. And this is the reason why we got away from the traditional fitness industry. Remember, we talked about, because of the fitness industry loves to just talk about exercise and calories, and that's really all they talk about. We really started to delineate and separate ourselves from that and provide value to our students in ways that were other than just calories and exercise and nutrition. Now, we've already talked about this. However, this is something you need to understand, and something that you must realize is that there is a time and place for focusing on calories and tracking and all that kind of stuff. Why? Because if someone is 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds plus overweight, right? However, they consistently still insist, hey, I still want to have complete flexibility. I still want to eat very complex foods. And when I say complex foods, I mean like foods with a lot of ingredients in them and being able to cook in very fancy ways and all that kind of stuff, right? Hey, I want to still have all of that, right? I want to eat however I want and how much ever I want, right? That's what they say. And yet they are still 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds plus overweight. Well, guess what? It's their poor habits around having that complete freedom that has resulted in them having that much excess energy on their body. And remember what excess energy is? Yes, fat, right? And so that probably means that they are going to have to simplify their diet and they are going to have to track everything in order for them to reprogram their habits. Do you think that they're going to have to do that? Absolutely. And so you cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot say, hey, I want to be able to lose a massive amount of weight. I got myself into this position by having to do all of these unnatural things in which I was eating significantly more than I burn, which is something that never existed in human history, okay? And then at the same time, I still want to be able to enjoy complete freedom and complete flexibility, and I want to be able to eat as many complex foods as I want. Well, guess what? One of those things might actually have to give in order for you to be able to get back into that normal range, and then you can go back into using some of the other ways of tracking food, right? In the same way, if someone says, hey, you know what? Right now, I don't move at all. I don't really move. I just sit at a desk all day long. I work from home. I just get up and I sit on a desk. Okay. Well, does it mean that for that specific person who's in a little bit of an unnatural situation, right? Because literally in human history, people did not work from home and never move, right? And so does that mean that they are going to have to track their steps and actually measure it? Probably, right? And so this is why maybe level 5 app tracking may not be for you if you are not significantly overweight. It might be something that you yourself might need to use for yourself or your students if you find that some students are maybe catching themselves lying to themselves because of their poor habits for so many years. And when I say lying, I don't mean it in a malicious way. I don't mean it that they are purposely out there lying. It's that their body and their mind truly does not have any gauge of how much food they're actually eating. They eat 2 slices of pizza, and for them, it's become so automatic that they're like, oh, that was probably like 50 calories or something like that, right? They have no concept of exactly how much the food is or how much calories it's actually having. And this might not be something that they didn't have at all. They might have had at some point a concept of how much food they were eating, but then they hit a point in life for many years where they started to get disconnected in that gap between how much food they were eating and how much it was actually impacting their body. It started to become less and less and less, right? Or for somebody who has terrible eating habits, right? For somebody who has terrible eating habits, guess what? They might have to go through a little bit of pain, a little bit of inconvenience. They might have to simplify their foods in order for them to be able to make progress to where it is that they want to go. Because ultimately, they're quote unquote lying to themselves or their poor eating habits or they're wanting to eat complex foods and them adding all these other ingredients that they don't even realize are causing them to eat significantly more calories. All of those things is what has most likely led them to being 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 pounds overweight, right? And so for that individual, are they going to have to simplify their life and make drastic changes in order for them to be able to get back into a normal range? Maybe. And so again, remember, this is why we have the different levels of food tracking depending on the goals and the outcome that each individual student is going through. I hope that makes sense. But in the end, even though we talk about all of this in the way that we are, it's very important to realize that our job as remote wellness practitioners is to make sure that we are meeting the student where they are at, because the more change that someone needs, the less they can handle, and big issues require little changes, and little changes will take care of big issues. And so this is why even though somebody might have to make some drastic changes to their eating, if they are not in the place in their life or in their headspace that can facilitate or cater for that change, then obviously that's not something that we as remote wellness practitioners are going to recommend. Because remember, ultimately, we are not out here to vomit and set our students on fire. Right? Because we need to understand that guess what? Yes, calories do matter. Yes, metabolism does matter. Yes, movement does matter. However, this does not mean that ultimately the student needs to understand all of the science behind it. And I want to really go ahead and hit this home for you because I think it's going to be a very important coaching understanding that is going to help you understand exactly what it is that you need to actually help your students with and what it is that you're not going to help your students with. And so the example example that I've prepared for you guys is the example of typing an email. Because I'm not sure if you actually know this, but when you actually type an email, did you know that every keyboard key that you hit when you are typing out an email is actually sending an electromagnetic signal through the wires that is going ahead and shifting the zeros and the ones in the JavaScript and the CSS code that is then moving the pixels on your screen that is going to go ahead and then typing out the letter inside of that email. Now, did you know that that is exactly how it works? Do you exactly know the ins and outs of what it is that I just said? Probably not. And guess what? Neither do I. But do we need to know how all of it actually works behind the scenes in order for us to be able to type out an email to our friend or anything like that? Of course not. All we do is we click the keys on the keyboard, we click a mouse button, we go to the, Gmail or Yahoo or whatever, and we just type out the email. And so in the same way, because we as remote wellness practitioners, we might know how all of the things work behind the scenes, it does not mean that all of a sudden we need to go ahead and set our students' brains on fire that they need to know all of this too, okay? It would be the same thing like if a computer scientist who does know the ins and outs of how a computer works and the electromagnetic signals and how the electromagnetic signals work and how the code works and how the pixels work and all that kind of stuff, if they were trying to teach somebody how to write an email, but then they kept insisting, hey, in order for you to write an email, you have to understand these electromagnetic code and how to understand this and how to do all of this. You need to understand all of that just to be able to write an email to your friend. If somebody did that, we would say, they have no idea what it means to properly educate and teach somebody. Because yes, there might be something that might be helpful or handy or a fun fact or something like that. But really, when you're teaching somebody how to write an email, it's literally, hey, open your computer, turn on your computer, right? Go to the XYZ browser, click on this on your keyboard, click on this on your mouse, and you'd go through that process. You wouldn't understand all of the things behind the scenes, right? It would be absurd if a computer scientist said, hey, I'm going to teach a class on how to write an email, and they're going to go ahead and teach all the electromagnetic signals and how the electromagnetic signal is created and how it works with XYZ. It would be very, very confusing. And so in the same way, we do not want to make that mistake when we are trying to talk to people about health. We don't want to go ahead and vomit on them, because we as RWPs understand the science behind why and how something works does not mean that we need to teach our students all of that always, okay? And so sometimes, yes, it does come in handy, but is it necessary always? Okay? Your students are not trying to become RWPs, and so there is no reason to cram down their throats and vomit on them and light their brains on fire. It is not necessary, okay? Because they don't need that in order to reach their goals. Their goals is they just want to send the email. They just want to lose a few pounds. They just want to feel better. They want to have a higher quality of life. They want to have more energy, right? And so in the case that this knowledge of how everything works behind the scenes is helpful for them, then we can help facilitate that for them, right? And you have that in your tool belt. You have that in your toolbox. You understand as an RWP the science behind it. However, if it is not necessary and not needed in order for them to be successful with their goals, then guess what? We don't need to go ahead and do that for them. And so this is why it is extremely valuable to have other sources of metrics other than just the weight scale on a daily basis in order to actually measure fat loss progress, okay? So it's like, hey, okay, if I'm not trying to go ahead and get obsessed with the scale every single day, what are some other ways in which I can track fat loss progress for myself and for my students? Well, it's a great question because it's not always just about the scale weight every single day. That's a very valid and accurate way to get an idea, but there's a lot of other ways as well. Number one, we already talked about the weekly average weight, being able to weigh yourself maybe 3 to 7 times per week and then averaging out that number. Again, that's a very helpful tool other than the daily check-ins for the weight, right? Number two is checking how your clothes fit. A lot of people underestimate that you might actually be storing water weight. You might actually be having, time of the month. It might be you started working out. There's a lot of factors, had salty foods, sleep that impact the scale weight. However, if your clothes are fitting better, then it doesn't matter what the dang scale says, okay? Same thing, body fat percentage. Again, although we talked about how it's not always accurate, it is just a tool, but it is a very good tool that can help you kind of take that focus away from the daily weight scale, okay? Number four, consistency, right? when you are tracking and looking, hey, am I actually staying consistent to my calories? Am I actually staying consistent to the plan? Am I looking at the inputs? Because if those are good, then guess what? The outputs are going to take care of themselves. I do not care what the weight scale says, because right now I'm focusing on my inputs, and then the outputs will take care of themselves. And then finally, fifth one on here is joint pain. A lot of times joint pain can be a good indication if somebody's actually making progress within their fat loss, because of the fact that they are doing better with the fat that is excess around their joints, and so their joint pain has significantly reduced as well. Okay, so these are just 5 that I wanted to go ahead and dump on here, so that way you can see, hey, okay, it's not all about the weight loss specifically, and there are other ways in order to be able to measure and gauge fat loss progress as well. In the same way, when we talk about just fat loss progress, well, guess what? There's health progress as well, right? Because it's not always just about fat loss, right? What about health progress in general? Well, if you look at things like energy level, you look at mood, you look at dietary quality, all of these are also very good indicators to be able to determine if somebody is making progress. So that way we're not just always hyper obsessed with fat loss only or muscle gain only or the weight on the scale every single day. There are many other ways to be able to see, hey, are we actually making progress other than just the scale weight? Okay, so bottom line, health is a very important thing to consider. It's more than just a number on the scale, okay? And so as we close out this training, that was the third point that we want to go ahead and touch on in terms of the 3 points when we talk about connecting nutrition and movement. And so with that being said, you now have a much clearer and more complete picture that you can be able to speak on these topics when we talk about connecting nutrition and movement and the intersection between all of these topics. And so ultimately, as we close out this training, I do want to go ahead and leave you with your engagement question for this training. What you're going to go ahead and do is you're going to comment inside of the student community. You're going to go ahead and let us know, what did you like and enjoy about this training? What did you think about this training in general? And what were some of your big takeaways or ahas from this training? Remember, don't provide lazy answers. This really is allowing you to solidify and provide feedback on how this training was. If it was very enlightening for you, let us know. Just give us an idea of how this training was for you. And then the action steps for this training are going to be nice and simple. There is no activity for this specific training, but it's going to be, hey, watching and study this training in full, and then going ahead and giving us a good, complete answer for the engagement question that we just talked about. Okay, so that is this training right here, connecting nutrition and movement. I am super excited for you as you start to get to the tail end of module number 3. And with that being said, I will catch you on the next training.